Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases and all things education related. So for today's video, I'm back with another kind of psychological video, but it is also a bit of a crossover with my true crime cases, because not only are we going to be talking about the psychological phenomenon or the psychological concept known as the bystander effect, but it relates very heavily to a murder case of a young woman named Kitty Genovese. I will also, towards the end of the video, be going into another case that people have since suggested it possibly relates to. So if you want to hear about not only what the effect actually is and how it came about in the case of Kitty Genovese and its influence on this concept, then keep on watching. Before we do get started, I am just going to check in my usual disclaimer that I like to include at the start of all my videos. So I'm just letting you guys know that I'm in no way claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases I cover over on my channel. I'm simply relaying the information that I'm able to find myself through research on the internet, and I don't mean to get anything wrong, mispronounce things or leave anything out. If I do, I'm genuinely sorry. I'm just relaying the information that I'm able to find online, so just take into account that not everything is accessible to me and I do get things wrong, and I apologise, but everything that I include in this video I believe is to the best of my knowledge accurate. So with all that being said, we shall just go ahead and get started discussing the bystander effect. So a general definition of the bystander effect is that it occurs when a crime or an emergency situation is in progress and there are witnesses present, but the presence of all of those bystanders actually prevents anyone from stepping in and intervening with the crime itself. I know this sounds like a strange concept when you hear it explained kind of in that way, since I'm pretty sure, or at least I'd like to hope and think, that everyone would genuinely believe that if there was a situation where someone needed their help, that they would step in and do what they can to intervene in the situation. And yet the bystander effect is still a concept that is found prevalent in some cases. It's generally believed that in these emergency situations where the bystander effect occurs, it's more likely an occurrence if there are a higher number of witnesses or bystanders present. It suggests that people are much more likely to aid the situation or step in themselves if there are far fewer people present, which is an interesting claim to consider if you were putting yourself kind of in that situation. As with all the cases on my channel, we're going to start from the very beginning, and this relates to the case of Kitty Genovese. The case of Kitty Genovese led the bystander effect being a popularised term within the field of psychology and much wider fields. Catherine Kitty Genovese's case takes place on March 13th in the year of 1964 when she was just 28 years old. Catherine, who was mostly referred to as Kitty, is remembered as someone with a particularly sunny disposition, and at around 2:30 AM that night she was headed home after leaving the bar that she had been working at. She had secured herself a manager's position at something called Ev's 11th Hour Bar in Queens in New York a few years prior, and so by now she'd gotten herself into a pretty regular routine when it comes to finishing her shifts and travelling home. At that time she was sharing an apartment with a friend of hers in a place called Kew Gardens, also in Queens, and when she'd finished at work the car journey to her apartment would take around 45 minutes in total. After pulling away from her work that night, she soon pulled up to a red traffic light and waited for it to change before then continuing her journey home. However, Kitty wasn't aware of the fact that there had been a car following her from the moment she pulled out of the car park by her work, and this mystery car would follow her all the way to her apartment. She pulled into the car park attached to the Kew Gardens Long Island Railroad station located within eyeshot of her apartment entrance, and this had been at around 3:15 AM. The car that had been trailing her on her journey home had parked in the car park attached to a bus stop down the road, so not far from where Kitty had parked. Kitty began the 5-minute walk to her apartment building's door, but she didn't notice the man heading straight for her holding a hunting knife. Kitty Genovese was stabbed twice in the back by the attacker, and due to the location of the wounds, she wasn't immediately fatally injured, and so as the young woman screamed as loudly as she could while running towards the building, neighbours began appearing. Her cries for help had alerted several of her neighbours who had also lived in the same building as her, and as she began to make more noise, the attacker ran for for his car. He had sped off quite hastily after initially attacking Kitty, but according to some of the neighbours that had witnessed him speed off, he was back at the building to find Kitty again just 10 minutes later, and once he pulled up to the building he seemed to head straight for Kitty Genovese. When he'd returned, he'd quickly spotted Kitty lying on the ground in the entrance of her building. She was alive, but she had been drifting in and out of consciousness since it had been around 10 minutes since the initial attack. Her attacker headed straight for her and he proceeded to rob her, sexually assault her and stab her multiple more times before fleeing the scene once again. At around 4:15 a.m, an emergency response team had arrived to Kitty's aid and had taken her straight into an ambulance ahead for the nearest hospital, but sadly she was pronounced as dead on the journey to the hospital as a result of a total of 14 stab wounds. Now, considering the entire incident had taken around 30 minutes from the initial attack to the attacker speeding off for the second time, emergency services had not received the first calls reporting the incident until after 4 a.m. The initial reports claimed that there had been a total of 38 witnesses or bystanders while the attack had taken place, and I just think this is so surprising. And according to some sources, each of these bystanders had obviously been questioned and they had been asked, those who hadn't placed emergency phone calls, why this was the case, and some of them had claimed that they actually had placed a call when they hadn't, whilst others claimed they had considered ringing emergency services but they assumed someone else would have done it by the time they had done it. Some had, however, claimed that they had in fact placed a call to emergency services, in particular to the local police department, but their reports had not been taken seriously or had not been taken any priority, and so they ended up just kind of being passed around or kept on hold, and so their reports didn't actually go through. And interestingly, on a side note, because of all this chaos in terms of who reported and who didn't, this case had a major impact on how 911 in America, how their emergency service systems work, because of the drastic outcome of this incident and what could have been done differently, as well as it introducing the bystander effect as a concept. 6 days after the attack on Kitty Genovese, the perpetrator had actually been caught while attempting to carry out a burglary, and the man was 29-year-old Winston Moseley, who at the time was actually married with 3 children and he had no criminal past. When Moseley had been arrested and held in custody on relation to the burglary incident, he had confessed to Kitty Genovese's murder and was able to provide them with extreme details of the incident, as well as stating that his only motive for the attack on Kitty had been to kill a woman. As a result, Winston Moseley was convicted on a murder charge and given a life sentence, and this was in 1964, where he actually eventually died in prison aged 81 in 2016, so it was quite recently. Now, the case of Kitty Genovese has a lot more recent updates, and there's been a lot of discussion over the years because it was so groundbreaking. I think people were just so affected by the thought of 38 people having witnessed this horrific crime that had not only been a brutal crime but also one that wasn't over quick. It was, like I said, it took place over 30 minutes, and at any point in that some of these bystanders could have helped or even gone down to help Kitty while she was suffering. And now I will go into sort of the more recent updates in relation to this case specifically, but before I do, I just kind of want to go into why this case is so important in psychology in relation to the bystander effect as a concept. So essentially, when this case fell into the public eye, the same question came into everyone's mind: why did none of these witnesses come to her aid? According to Latan and Dali, I apologise if I've mispronounced those, they were 2 key researchers involved in this whole field. They had attempted to explain the bystander effect by breaking it down into 2 separate theories. The first had been that the bystander effect can be the result of the diffusion of responsibility, while the second being the result of social influence. So the first of these refers to the proposal that the more bystanders there are present during an incident, the less likely individuals will feel a personal responsibility to have an involvement or to intervene in the incident itself. And the second, which was social influence, suggests that people or individuals like the bystanders, the witnesses in the situation, based their own responses and behaviours in the incident on how they view the others in the incident behaving. So if they don't see anyone else actively trying to intervene, they won't themselves. Obviously, it is worth noting that not everyone will react the same way in an emergency or like a scary situation such as this incident, and it's completely natural for people to have different responses for these situations. And you know, a common response is for people to freeze up when witnessing something potentially traumatic, while other people naturally snap into action. It is completely natural that people do have different responses, and I don't want anyone to think that the whole concept behind this is shaming people for not being someone who's jumping into action straight away. Like I said, everyone has different responses to fear-provoking situations, and it's kind of hard to explain or expect to know how you'd react in a situation like that until you're in it. You can only sort of say what you think or what you'd hope you'd do. But the bystander effect is still an interesting concept to consider, and it's definitely widely researched over the years. It has been a huge focus of research within the field of psychology. As a result of all of this focus on the concept, the idea of an active bystander was introduced, and there is a lot of research that is actually dedicated into educating people on how to be an active bystander and kind of knowing and understanding the difference and how you can improve your own reactions in situations such as the case of Kitty Genovese. But if we head back to covering the Kitty Genovese case more specifically, like I said, there has been a lot of discussion over the years about the details and things that people feel the need to criticise, and it's just definitely worth considering. So in the weeks following the tragic attack on Kitty Genovese, an article was actually released in the New York Times, which had obviously had the intention of covering the facts of the case. It was written by a man named A.M. Rosenthal, and it had been titled 37 Who Saw Murder Didn't Call Police. Now, firstly, if you recall, the actual initial report of the murder had actually listed there being 38 bystanders during the incident, and I couldn't really find an explanation that provided a bit more understanding as to why this article was written with the title of 37 bystanders. I don't know whether it was a mistake or whether there was initial change in the report. I don't know, but that in itself is the first thing that you can kind of notice from this article that had been released. And this article had been huge. It shot Kitty's case into the public eye, and as a result, the case was then shared and retold numerous times over and over again, not only by just regular people, but also authors and researchers. But each of these accounts of the incident was soon heavily picked apart as lacking or altering a number of the details regarding to what had happened to Kitty Genovese. As I said, the number of the bystanders, according to the initial reports, had started off at 38, before decreasing to 37 in the initial article, and then in a book released in 2014 by a man named Kevin Cook, it decreased further by claims that there had been just one sole witness during the attack. So this account alleged that this sole witness had actually intervened and spooked the attacker by shouting at him before then heading off to ring the police, which is when the attacker had returned to continue his attack on Kitty. And this is obviously completely different to all of the previous retellings of the case and the incident. And the confusion and the disputation over the details of Kitty's case continue to this day. There are still arguments over what's accurate, whether it's a myth, whether it's been exaggerated, but it is commonly argued that no matter what the actual number of the bystanders that had been at the time of Kitty's murder, the concept of the bystander effect remains the same. There were still people present that were witnessing this crime who didn't intervene for whatever reason, and these potential reasons are kind of what fuels the fascination within the field of psychology. We kind of want to understand why this occurs. And as I said at the start of the video, there have been other cases potentially linked to the concept of bystander effect, including that of 2-year-old James Bolger in 1993 in the UK. I won't go into the details of this specific case because that's a huge case, and obviously I'm focusing more on the psychological concept and its potential links to this concept. But what I will do, I'll link Eleanor Neal's video in the description. I'm not sure if anyone else has covered it. If I can find some more good coverage on YouTube, I'll definitely link those below as well. But I know Elle has a fantastic video on the James Bolger case if you aren't already familiar. It's definitely worth a watch if you want to know more about the details, and especially after watching this video, you'll be able to watch that breakdown of the case and see where the bystander effect concept links come from. But essentially, just long story short, this case involves a 2-year-old being walked out of a shopping centre in front of hundreds and potentially thousands of people, where he met his death at the hands of 2 10-year-old boys, and it was later determined that on their journey before harming this little boy, the 3 kids had actually encountered a number of people who had stopped them and said, you know, where are you going, all this sort of thing. So it's just been an interesting point of discussion where these individuals have been completely unaware of what was going on. But what is interesting is that during the journey within the James Bulger case timeline, it was actually believed that there were a total of 38 witnesses or bystanders, people they came into contact with prior to his death, that could have intervened if they had known a little bit more. So it's just strange to consider that number being exactly the same in the 2 cases. So both the James Bulger case and the Kitty Genovese case are 2 very well known and absolutely heartbreaking cases, and I just kind of wanted to link them in a little bit to show you some of the discussion points. I have kind of linked them to this psychological concept of bystander effect. Obviously, as I've said, this whole thing is just a theory, it's just ideas that have been researched and explored as potentially having links. In reality, they are just theories, but it is both interesting and kind of a terrifying thought to consider the amount of people that have the ability to possibly witness a crime, a violent incident, and not step in without even realising that they're actually doing more harm than good, especially when you consider that even the nicest human beings may find themselves in a situation where they don't intervene and don't help without even being aware of the impact of what they're doing or not doing. So just let me know your thoughts below. This was a little bit of a rambly video, it was a little bit less formal just because it's such an open concept. Some people just completely disagree with it. I just thought it was an interesting point of discussion. Obviously, like I said, the whole purpose of these videos is just an open discussion, so I'm not saying that this is law, it's all just theories, it's all just like topics that are just covered and researched. So I thought it'd be interesting because I've actually had a few people now say they want me to cover the Kitty Genovese case. So let me know your thoughts down below and whether you've read any interesting pieces of research relating to it, because it is really a fascinating field when you delve into it. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.